Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about empowerment. This is one you can find just a billion books on and research and things like that. So I'm not going to get into the typical stuff that you'll be able to find just in your normal research, other than to say empowerment is important. So important that you might even consider it a value that you want to push through your organization. Um, but it's a leadership value, right? It's a person who's just a worker on the line or whatever, probably wouldn't know what to do with that as a value. So it's not something you want to run as an entire organization, but maybe consider it one of those things that you hold specifically for leadership. I'm not one that drives for an assessment sheet that's different for leaders than the others. So you might consider how you would do something like that if you're going to use this as a value. But I do think it's important, and I think by the end of this, you'll understand why. I want to dive into the cause and effect of empowerment a little bit and dive into why people leadership misses on this one so often. Primarily, your leaders need to empower people and not control them. I guess that's the easy way to put it, right? When you are, I'd call it the flip side of a coin. If you're empowering, great. If you're not, you're controlling. One or the other. It's really not, there's no middle ground here. Because empowerment, go to maybe a definition of how I'm looking at this. When you're empowering someone, you are still responsible for the result, but you have delegated the responsibility of the execution. So let's put it that way. There's the responsibility of the result versus the execution. You as the leader are responsible for the result. You as the employee, or they as the employee, are responsible for the execution. And you have delegated that, okay? Why do we have employees? We have employees because we can't get the job done ourselves. We don't have enough time. So we have to delegate it. Now, when we do that delegation, there's a competency build, there's training, there's everything. We talked about that previously, that you've got to manage the competency. Leadership is a competency as well. So directors, you need to be building the competency of leadership. And this is one of those competencies of empowerment. So the idea here is you need to relinquish control of the execution and maintain control of the result. That's a fine balance. But if you step in on the execution, you have fundamentally created a micromanagement scenario, number one. And number two, you have diluted the trust that you had with that employee. You have got to do everything that you can to avoid doing this. If you need to get involved, it's not a, hey, this is how I think you should do it, and doing it. It is a, you can always mentor and engage with them and say, hey, I recommend that you go this way or that way or whatever. That's mentorship, right? That's guiding them, but then giving it to them to do the execution. If you walk in and you step in and you start doing something on them without their permission, you have inhibited trust. And then I'll go a step further and I'll say what else you've done. You've inhibited trust in the team below you, because you can bet that information is going to get out. And number two, you've also inhibited your ability to lead that team, because now the lack of trust will cause an isolation in each of those individuals that know this. And the isolation will not create openness and transparency in your meetings, okay? Now, as a standard leader in the organization, that might not be too harmful, but I would say that it is. But when you get into the upper echelons, the C-suite, or the directorship and your leadership team, when you have a leadership team, when you're a director, this will hurt you. When you have a leadership team below you who is unwilling to come to you with something because You have infiltrated their world with control. You have inhibited your entire directorship from succeeding. You're no longer going to get the input that you need to be able to run your organization as a whole. Remember, every brain in the game, okay? So let's say you're a director and you have 5 leads, and those leads lead 5 teams, okay? Major parts of the organization, let's say you're head of accounting or you're head of engineering or something like that. And all of a sudden, those 5 leads, you're coming to them with directional conversations. If you're doing it right, you're coming to them with directional conversations about the entire organization, your department. You're not just talking to one person about their thing or to another person about their thing. You're talking to that team about leading that department as a whole. And when you have inhibited or controlled any aspect of that department, therefore isolating and inhibiting trust and conversation, you are undercutting your own leadership ability, your own ability to have every brain in the game and make good decisions. I want to give you a few examples. CEOs are infamous for this, and they probably don't do it nearly as much with their director as they would with lower echelons within their organization. They'll step in and they will solve a problem because, hey, they're the CEO, they can do this, right? Rather than saying, hey, I recommend to my director, I recommend that you have these guys do this particular thing. He steps in, disrupts it, and becomes operational. When you have an operational CEO, and I'm gonna step away from this from a startup standpoint, but when you have an organization that's been running for a while and you have all the ducks in a row and you have all the things in place, or at least you think you do, a CEO stepping in and disrupting things. And let me put it this way. A CEO stepping in and solving a problem is a disruption. Okay? It is equivalent to a feature in an engineering solution that ended up getting released, even though it wasn't planned. It can be a good thing to some people, but it breaks the process and creates so much havoc and wreaks so much havoc throughout the organization. And depending on how often it's done, it can destroy the organization. So CEOs, I'm cautioning you, lean on your teams. You have delegated, lean on them. As a startup, you're going to be very involved. There's active involvement in just about everything, but you need to be very considerate of the fact that you will displace trust if you get involved in something that person has been delegated to do and has control and is doing fine with. So be careful. This is something that you, as a CEO of a startup, need to learn and start pulling away from, because as you give up control, maintain control of the results, but give up control of the execution. Besides, who cares how something's done, as long as the job gets done, right? That's all that really matters. And then I want to dive into the board, and I also want to talk about the investors. Boards, you really can influence the execution of your organization, and that is a bad thing. Okay, you are tasked with the strategic direction and the survivability of the organization, and you have one person, the CEO, to go through to make that to happen. Okay, now of course you can have relationships with your teams and everything else. You can do whatever you want from that respect, but your leadership is constrained to the boardroom. And the exception to that is the auditing. I think it's super important that a board be involved in auditing the execution, saying this is what happened, this is how it happened, and this is our recommendations for how, CEO, you can make it better in the future. I think that's really important because you're the only audit point. Unless the organization has hired auditors, you're the only audit point. finance is an obvious committee that you guys would have to dig into the finances, but why aren't you auditing the operations, the execution of things? Why aren't you auditing the different departments? There's nothing wrong with going in, getting a committee, and doing some investigation and making sure that your organization is running the way it should. Again, you're not controlling execution. You are simply auditing the results. Okay. If you were to get involved, and I've seen it so many times, if a board gets involved in the execution, they inherently place distrust in their CEO by the rest of the organization, and that's not a good thing. You are empowering your CEO. That's what you need to accomplish. Your CEO is empowering your leadership team, and your leadership team is running and executing the organization. And then finally, the investment board. And similar to the board itself, your investors may be on the board. But I think that they come in almost with this entitlement mindset. And I want to address that because I think that an entitlement mindset is dangerous for any organization. And so dangerous that you need to cut it out. If you have an investor or you have a board member, I guess I'll put it that way. An investor can invest because they want to. If you have a board member with an entitlement mindset, perhaps he's a board member who's an investor, get him out of power. Cut it out. Just cut it out, because you cannot survive good, solid decisions without the selfish intent that comes alongside entitlement. You just have to cut it out. So do what you got to do. Entitlement comes in many different forms, but you got to look out for that attitude. I would say your organization at the board level probably should have some of their own values of the organization, and whatever the opposite of entitlement is. Entitlement is an antithesis to the type of behaviors that we're looking for on a board, on an investment board, on investment, for investors. Absolutely just have to cut it out. Anyways, so that's a bit of a long video today, but really wanted to dive into this idea of empowerment and the negative side, the cause, the effect of empowerment. Hopefully that gives you some sense of how to move forward on some things. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk to you later.